Hi guys! So I have the Peter Pan abridged book again, and this time I'm going to start at Chapter 4, The Island Country. And there's a little picture there with some birds. Feeling that Peter was on his way back, the island had awakened into life. In his absence, things usually were quiet on the island, but now one only had to put one's ear to the ground to hear the whole island seething with life. On this evening, the chief forces of the island were disposed as follows. The Lost Boys were out looking for Peter, the pirates were out looking for the Lost Boys, and the Indians were out looking for the pirates, and the beasts were out looking for the Indians. They were going around and around the island, but they did not meet because all of them were going at the same rate. All wanted blood, except the boys, who tonight were out to greet their captain. There were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. They were forbidden by Peter to look in the least like him, and they wore the skins of animals slain by themselves. First there was Toodles, who had a kind, sweet nature, and had been in fewer adventures than the others. Then there was Nibs, who was gay and light-hearted, and Slightly, who was the most conceited of the boys. The fourth was Curly, who was always in some trouble or another, and the last were the twins, who always kept close. The first to fall out of the circle moving around the island were the boys. They flung themselves down on the grass, close to their underground home. "I do wish Peter would come back," every one of them said nervously. "I am the only one who is not afraid of the pirates," Slightly said, "but I wish Peter would come back and tell us whether he has heard anything more about Cinderella." While they talked, they heard a distant sound. It was a grim song. Yo ho, the pirate life. The flag of skull and bones, a merry hour, a hempen rope, and hey for Davy Jones. At once the Lost Boys were no longer there. Rabbits could not have disappeared more quickly, with the exception of Nibs, who had darted away to keep watch, while they were already in their home under the ground. How had they reached it? On the ground above were 7 large trees, each having in its trunk a hole as large as a boy. There were the 7 entrances to the home under the ground for which Hook had been searching in vain these many moons. As the pirates advanced, one with a quick eye sighted Nibs disappearing through the woods. "Shall I after him, Captain?" the pirate asked. "Not now," Hook said darkly. "He is only one, and I want to catch all 7. Scatter and look for them." The men were a villainous-looking lot. In the midst of them, blackest and largest of them all, James Hook lay at his ease in a rough chariot drawn by his men. Instead of a right hand he had the iron hook, which he encouraged them to increase their pace. He was thin and black-visaged, with his hair hanging down in long curls, which gave him a sinister look. In his mouth he had a holder which enabled him to smoke 2 cigars at once. But undoubtedly the grimmest part of him was his iron claw. Such was the terrible man against whom Peter Pan was pitted. Now as his men fanned out to look for the boys, he seemed moved to talk confidingly with his faithful bosun, Smee. "Most of all," Hook was saying, "I want their captain, Peter Pan. 'Twas he cut off my arm." He brandished the hook threateningly. "I've waited long to shake his hand with this. Oh, I'll tear him." He cast a look of pride upon his iron hand and one of scorn upon the other. Then he frowned. "Peter flung my arm," he said, wincing, "to a crocodile that happened to be passing by." "I have often," said Smee, "noticed your strange dread of crocodiles." "Not of crocodiles," Hook corrected him, "but of that one crocodile." He lowered his voice. "It liked my arm so much, Smee, that it has been following me ever since from sea to sea and from land to land, licking his lips for the rest of me." "In a way," said Smee, "it's sort of a compliment." "I want no such compliments," Hook barked angrily. "I want Peter Pan, who first gave the brute its taste for me." He sat down on a large mushroom, and now there was a quiver in his voice. "Smee," he said huskily, That crocodile would have had me before this, but by a lucky chance it swallowed a clock which goes tick inside it, and so before it can reach me I can hear the tick and bolt." He laughed, but in a hollow way. "Some day," said Smee, "that clock will run down, and then he'll get you." Hook wetted his dry lips. "Aye," he said, "that's the fear that haunts me." Since sitting down he had felt curiously warm. "Smee," he said, "this seat is hot." He jumped up. He and Smee examined the large mushroom on which he had been sitting. They tried to pull it up, and it came away at once in their hands, for it had no root. Stranger still, smoke began to come up at once. The pirates looked at each other. "A chimney!" they both exclaimed. They had indeed discovered the chimney of the home under the ground. Not only smoke came out of it, but there was also children's voices. For so safe did the boys feel in their hiding place that they were gaily chattering. The pirates listened grimly, and then they replaced the mushroom. They looked down around them and noted the holes in the 7 trees. "Did you hear them say that Peter Pan's away from home?" Smee whispered, fidgeting with his cutlass. Hook stood for a long time lost in thought, and at last a curdling smile lit up his swarthy face. Smee had been waiting for it. "Unrip your plan, Captain," he cried eagerly. "To return to the ship," Hook replied slowly through his teeth, "and cook a large rich cake of a jolly thickness with green sugar on it. We will leave the cake where the boys will find it. They will gobble it up because, having no mother, they don't know how dangerous 'tis to eat rich damp cake." He burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! They will die!" Smee had listened with growing admiration. "It's the wickedest, prettiest policy I have ever heard of," he cried, and in their exultation the two danced and began to sing. "Avast belay when I appear, by fear they've overtook. What's left upon your bones when you have shaken claws with Hook?" They began the chorus, but they never finished it, for another sound broke in and stilled them. It was at first a very tiny sound, but as it came nearer it was much more distinct. Tick, 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 tick. Hook stopped dancing, one foot in the air. He shuddered. "The crocodile!" he gasped, and bounded away, followed by his bosun. Now the boys came out once more into the open. Presently Nibs rushed breathless into their midst. "I have seen a wondrous thing," he cried, as they gathered him eagerly. "A great white bird. It is flying this way." "What kind of bird do you think?" "I don't know," Nibs said, "but it looks so weary, and it flies, it moans. Poor Wendy!" Wendy was now almost overheard, and they could hear her plaintive cry. But more distinct came the shrill voice of Tinker Bell. The jealous fairy had now cast off all disguise of friendship, and was darting at her victim from every direction, pinching savagely. "Hullo, Tink!" cried the wondering boys. Tink's reply rang out. "Peter wants you to shoot the Wendy." It was not in their nature to question when Peter ordered. Toodles had a bow and arrow with him, and Tink noted it. "Quick, Toodles, quick!" she screamed. "Peter will be so pleased." Toodles excitedly fitted the arrow into his bow. "Out of the way, Tink!" he shouted. Then he fired, and Wendy fluttered to the ground with an arrow in her breast. Chapter 5. The Little House. "I have shot the Wendy!" Toodles cried proudly to the other boys. "Peter will be so pleased with me." Overhead Tinker Bell laughed and went into hiding. The others did not hear her. They had crowded around Wendy, and as they looked a terrible silence fell upon the wood. Slightly was the first to speak. "This is no bird," he said in a scared voice. "I think it must be a lady." "A lady?" said Toodles, trembling. "Now I see," Curly said. "Peter was bringing us a lady to take care of us, and you have killed her." Toodles' face was very white. "I must go away," he said, shaking. "I am so afraid of Peter." It was at this tragic moment that they heard a sound which made the heart of every one of them rise in his mouth. They heard Peter crow. "Peter!" they cried, for it was always thus that he signaled his return. "Hide her!" they whispered, and gathered hastily round Wendy. The Toodles stood aloof. Again came that ringing crow, and Peter dropped down in front of them. "Great news, boys!" he cried. "I have brought, at last, a mother for you all. Have you not seen her? She flew this way." "Peter," said Toodles quietly, "I will show her to you." To the others he said, "Stand back and let Peter see." So they all stood back, and Peter looked at Wendy. Then he saw the arrow. He took it from her heart and faced his band. "Whose arrow?" he demanded sternly. "Mine, Peter," said Toodles on his knees. Peter raised the arrow to use it as a dagger. Toodles did not flinch. "Strike, Peter," he said. "I cannot strike," said Peter with awe. "There is something that stays my hand." "It is she!" cried Nibs. "The Wendy lady! So she has raised her arm." "She lives," Peter said briefly. Then he knelt beside her and found his button, which she had put on the chain that she wore around her neck. "See," he said, "the arrow struck against this. It is the kiss that I gave her. It has saved her life." "Listen to Tink," said Curly. "She's crying because the Wendy lives." Then they had to tell Peter of Tink's crime, and almost never had they seen him look so stern. "Listen, Tinker Bell," he cried. "I am your friend no more. Begone from me forever." She flew on his shoulder and pleaded, but he brushed her off. Not until Wendy again raised her arm did he relent sufficiently to say, "Well, not forever, but for a whole week." But what to do with Wendy in her present delicate state of health? "Let us carry her down into the house," Curly suggested. "No, no," Peter said. "You must not touch her. It would not be sufficiently respectful." "But if she lies there," Toodle said, "she will die." "Aye," said Slightly admitted, "but there is no way out." "Yes, there is," cried Peter. "Let's build a house around her." They were all delighted. "Quick," he ordered them, "bring me, each of you, the best of what we have." In a moment they were scurrying this way and that, down for bedding, up for firewood, and while they were at it, who should appear but John and Michael? Peter had quite forgotten about them. "Curly," said Peter in his most captainy voice, "see that these boys help in the building of the house." In the meantime the woods had been alive with the sound of axes. Almost everything needed for a cozy dwelling already lay at Wendy's feet. "If only we knew the kind of house that she likes best," said one of the boys. "Peter," shouted another, "she is moving in her sleep. Her mouth opens." "Perhaps she is going to sing in her sleep," said Peter. "Wendy, sing the kind of house that you would like to have." Immediately, without opening her eyes, Wendy began to sing. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest I've ever seen, with funny little red walls and a roof of mossy green." By the greatest good luck the branches they had brought were sticky with red sap, and all the trees were carpeted with moss. When the house was made just as Wendy had asked, Peter strode up and down ordering finishing touches. When it seemed absolutely finished, nothing remained to do but to knock. The boys stood before the door trying to look their best. Peter knocked politely. The door opened and a lady came out. It was Wendy. They had all whipped off their hats. Slightly was the first to speak. "Wendy, lady," he said, "for we have built this house." "Oh, say you're pleased," said Nibs. "Lovely, darling house," Wendy said, and they were the very words that the boys had hoped that she would say. Then they all went on their knees, and holding out their arms, cried, "Oh, Wendy, lady, be our mother." "Ought I?" Wendy said, all shining. "Of course I'm only a little girl, and I have no real experience." And then, when they pleaded with her, "Very well," she said, "I will do my best. Come inside at once, you naughty children, for I am sure your feet are damp. And before I put you to bed I have just enough time to finish the story of Cinderella." By and by she tucked them up into the great bed in the home under the trees, but she herself slept that night in the little house, and Peter kept watch outside with drawn sword, for the pirates could be heard cruising far away and the wolves were on the prowl. So the next time we're going to do the home under the ground. See, there's a picture there. The end for now. Bye.